Hello and welcome to this discussion about sustainability and sustainable innovation. My name is Ilan Madjar. I'm a PLM consultant, solution architect, and a co-founder of PDM Solutions. With me today are two of my colleagues, whom I'm sure will have a lot to talk and say about this topic. Frank Popielas, a co-founder of SMS Think Task, and an expert and educator in the area of system modeling, simulation, and MBSE. My other colleague is Voskuil, a well-known PLM coach and a blogger. I'm sure a lot of you might have heard about the Visual Dutchman blog. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. And maybe we'll start with you introducing yourself a little bit more depth, maybe a little bit about your background, history, and how did you become to be an expert in your field. And Frank, we'll start with you, and then Jos, you can follow.
Thank you, Ilan. My name is Frank Popielas. As Ilan mentioned, I'm the co-founder of SMS Think Tank and managing partner. The company exists for the last 5 years already. Before we started together with my business partner at Lajinsky to have this company, I worked in the industry for over 2 decades, in the automotive industry, in the supplier industry at Dana Corporation. And this is where I was responsible, not just in one of the business units for testing, mechanical testing, but very early on since the 90s also for simulation. And this is where I learned relatively fast the importance of the simulation in a driving and high-end business. And also towards the end where I was at Dana, but it was pretty much the end. It's 10 years ago when we realized this already, that we have to go into different approaches where we have to think in terms of systems, where we have to think how can we do things as a business in general sustainable. And this is where we started to look into systems modeling and simulation. At the same time, I was responsible together with, again, my co-founder at Lajinsky, also creating the system modeling and simulation working group between NAFEMS and INCOSI. And this is where we said, based on our background, let's make that knowledge what we gained in our professional life available across the various industries. That's why we founded our company. And especially with the background also, in my case, not just from a Dana perspective, the engineering and the simulation background, but also the physics I studied in Moscow, Russia at the Technological University with the focus on theoretical physics. I think I got quite a good idea what is needed in order to use that knowledge, bring it together with the day-to-day challenges the industry is facing and apply this to new thinking. In this case, the system thinking combined with the business aspects of it to make it, to get back to the topic, sustainable.
Very good. And Jos, please.
Okay, so an interesting overlap with Frank. I started my career as I studied physics and mathematics, and I started teaching at the technical high school. And the beauty of that is that you're used to work with models, but from the other hand, what I benefit still a lot from is I also learned that you have to talk to an audience that not necessarily knows all the terms and all the words that you say. So you learn to look at your audience and to reflect on the right level with them. And from being a teacher, I became involved in technical automation, which was CAD and slowly data management. And data management slowly evolved into PDM and PLM. And this is something I've been doing since 1999. I started my private company initially to do knowledge management, but I was dragged in the world of PLM by Smart Team. And I became their Flying Dutchman. I was training partners, training new sales organizations, but I was also mediating a lot in PLM implementations all around the world. And that's where I learned it's not about the technology often, it's about people, methodology, and understanding and having the right expectations. And that's why I started my blog, The Virtual Dutchman, in 2008. by sharing those experiences first for the mid-market, but the longer it took, it was clear that those mid-market problems are the same in big companies. And sometimes even big companies are more rigid than the small enterprises. And this is what I'm currently doing. I'm coaching companies, vendors, implementers, and companies as a client in their whole PLM awareness and implementation process. From that, the last years, digital transformation, of course, has become a big buzzword, and to make sense of that, digitalization. And since 2-3 years, I'm active with Rich McFall in the PLM Global Green Alliance, because we also believe that digitalization and new ways of working can bring sustainability for our climate and for the earth. And that's why we started the PLM Green Alliance.
Okay, yeah, I completely share that view, and it's interesting. You mentioned your common background in physics, which science in general, I think, is it's key to understanding the importance of models, like you said, I think, Frank, and how do models describe and simulate reality, right? Which is part of what we're doing. But it's also, from a sustainability standpoint, I think physics science is really important to the understanding of everything behind things like pollution, climate change, and obviously both shared some interesting experience learning from your experience, listening to people, processes, planning. So that's and how it related eventually to sustainability. So this leads me to the next question. I will start with you, Frank. So you can follow. What is your view about the trend towards, a lot has been said recently about more system thinking, the broader picture in context or in relation to sustainability versus a more linear specific, linear thinking. How do you see that, and how do you relate that? How do you think it relates to sustainability and business sustainability?
Yeah, I think you mentioned already quite a few, especially Joe's mentioned quite a few keywords, ideas already, which are very important in that context. But before I get into this, when we're talking about from a system thinking perspective and how to combine this with the sustainability, let's go back to understand what are our trends and challenges currently on the market. And I think one of the major things is that we have much more complexity coming into the picture, and especially due to the fact that we have much more electronics, mechatronics, embedded systems in our everyday life now, in our products, in the systems we use. And not just that we use those systems, but also those systems interact with each other. And this is where, just from an engineering perspective, in order to produce properly, develop them properly, those products and systems, we need to think in terms of systems. And this is, of course, there we need to have different approaches to. It's not just, it's like you said, not a linear approach anymore. You have to have a collaborative approach, iterative approaches, in order to be able to address easily changing market conditions, number one, and changing requirements coming back from the product in use as well. This is one aspect of that. This is just from an engineering perspective. But at the same time, society in general is thinking much more, call it close to nature, more responsible thinking. And the sustainability from a business meets the sustainability from a nature perspective. And both go hand in hand. And then in that case, also, you have to think in terms of systems, not just as one thing, because whatever you put out there is interacting with something else in the nature. You have an impact, and you have to think about this upfront, how you can do this appropriately so that you don't damage anything. At the same time, your business is sustainable. But nowadays, I have to add here one more comment, and of course, we can talk much more about this. Yes, your business is sustainable when you also are responsible from a nature perspective. I think we are getting to that point already nowadays.
Yes, I agree. I think that from a business, a sustainable business is built on a sustainable business plan. Like you said, you need to look at the bigger picture from an engineering or operational standpoint, but also looking at it from a bigger perspective, I think sustainable business or sustainable world and sustainable business are kind of two sides of the same coin, or one, you invest in one and yes, it will impact the other. And then there's also the social implication as well, like you mentioned. Jos, what's your take on that?
I think one of the big impacts on system thinking is globalization. I mean, before globalization, you had your local market you could predict, and you didn't care so much what happened around you. Yeah? But globalization and being in real time connected with almost everyone in the world makes the impact of what you do visible. It makes you also aware that not everything is shared equally. So if you want to have other people also have a sustainable life, you cannot dump on all your waste on them. You also have to think about how you, with your products, with your product development, remain within a social boundary for the world. Where in the past, I would say 50 years ago, perhaps in the Netherlands, we didn't care so much. We sent our stuff to Asia for burning our rubbish. And now we know and we feel more responsible because we see the other people at the other side. So there is complexity in society because of the connectivity. And of course, our products are more complex. And that's another way of system thinking that already existed from the aerospace and defense in the initial times.
Maybe I can add here another brief comment to that. And Jos, you mentioned this earlier. It's not so much about technology anymore. It's about the way we interact with each other, the culture, the organization. It's the way we behave. It's the way we structure our processes. In my opinion, in general, technology is available to do what we want to do. We just have to make sure it is done in an efficient way from a business perspective so that we don't waste resources, and resources in not just from a material perspective, but also from a time, manpower perspective, etc. But as I mentioned, when I say resources and material, of course, when we do this responsible, have the right optimized process in place, then we deal also with our material, with our nature resources in a much, much better way, more efficient way, and can address those also down the road while the system or the product is in service. So I think that's very important that we don't just push the technology anymore. That's kind of what you go back in the past. We just focus on getting technology out there and not worrying about the rest of it. Nowadays, in order for business to be sustainable, start with your organization, with the processes, your culture, the way you interact with each other, not just within a company, but also from a global perspective with each other. Then you can sustain your business, and this is where you have in mind the rest of the world as well.
So I agree, Frank. I think sustainable businesses, like I said earlier, and sustainable world is one go hand in hand. And I also agree with you, Jos. I mean, and Frank, there's a lot, from the system thinking, you can look at the broader world sustainability, like Jos said, the managing the overall resource, not just about a specific country or state. Look at the overall needs, those social needs, the global needs, where there's a lot of poor countries that are probably suffering from the polluting of the larger companies. At the same time, they still need to grow and have their own growing needs. So balancing all that, I think system thinking is essential in balancing all that. So moving on to my next question, and this is based on an article I recently read. I know, Jos, you're familiar with it as well, from the BCG group, the Boston Consulting Group, and it's called The Next Generation of Climate Innovation. And I'll quote one sentence: climate innovation can move the world towards net zero while creating enormous business and economics value. And then they continue and they bring examples of different companies like GM and other ones that are either reinventing, re-engineering their processes or completely new innovations, and countries like South Korea that invest in this. So talk about the bigger pictures, challenges, and whatnot. So my question to you, gentlemen, is, and we'll start with you, Frank, do you believe that sustainability is just the right or good thing to do ethically or whatever you want to call it, or does it also make good business sense? I mean, is there an opportunity there?
From a business perspective, and this is especially since we are going out and help companies in their process to mature, this is where we say, yes, it makes completely business sense. Yeah, because in the end, if you don't break out of your traditional four walls, you are not competitive anymore. And what means competitive? You need to collaborate with each other. You need to be open with each other. You have to be very efficient. And I'm going back to the fact that don't drive your business through technology, but drive your business through partnerships, through, and that's what I mean with corporations and new approaches, and this is where we are talking about the culture, the organization. Think about where are you positioned with your company, in what region, make use of the various cultures, make use of your environment around it, and based on the business you're in, of course, you have to make sure you use the latest processes. The technology is out there, and you can make use of this at that point efficiently. Don't squeeze your processes into a technology. It has to be the other way around. And at that point, when you have considered, and that's why very holistically I said this here, once you have this approach in place in your organization, it's relatively agile and flexible. You don't have to worry about anymore that something is changing because you are flexible by nature in your company and you are not afraid that something might change. And this way you say, okay, something else I need to happen. I need to consider this appropriately and apply this. I adjust my businesses and my processes accordingly. And then, of course, I look, because there are a lot of smart minds out there which develop the technology you can plug in quite often, even with the technology you use already or the tools you use already. You just have additional updates. Yeah, so it's really where you put your human mind to work all the time, make use of that, and don't just blindly rely on the technology, but let the technology work for you.
Yes, so yeah, I mean, definitely open, fostering more, open business culture, like you said, right. Agile procedures. I agree. Will drive the technology and the transformation. And so, Jos, what's your take on that?
I don't know how much Shell is also in the news at the other side of the ocean, but there was a court case last week where the judge said Shell was not serious enough in their measures for reducing carbon gas exhaustions. So they had a 2030 target and a 2050 target, and the judge said your target for 2030 is too low. You have to be more agile and faster to reach those targets based on, I would say, knowledge and feedback from the outside world. And in a way, Shell was furious because how could the judge push their business to change? And they were afraid that their shares would drop. But what you see is that even their shares didn't fall down, because a lot of shareholders of Shell have the same intention. They want to have a sustainable business. They want to be future oriented. But it's the rigidness of the organization that says there is still oil in the ground and we have to pump it up because this is what we know and this is where we make easy money, instead of doing the painful exercise to become more flexible and to invest in new stuff. And it was a win in the Netherlands, but it might have a lot of spin-offs in other countries and in other situations. And I think it's showing that the people are much more important in nowadays than in the past. Right? The business are not that powerful anymore.
Sure. No, I completely agree. I think you need to increase the demand, and by demand I mean people. I think people and normally tend to gravitate to what's better and healthier and whatnot. So in your case, you mentioned, the legal system, in other countries like in the US, it's not as easy, right? The government is not necessarily as involved, or the legal system, so it's not as easy. That's why I think people need to drive this change, people and businesses. But at the same time, acknowledge the fact that there is a green premium in Bill Gates' terminology, right? There's a lot of cheap oil, fossil fuel, so it's not just easy to dump all the infrastructure and, okay, it's not as easy as, okay, we're now going to re-engineer and the next day we're profitable. There's a huge investment over so many years. There's easy money from the fossil fuel. So I personally definitely acknowledge the challenge there. It is a multi-decades transformation in my view, but you can start small.
But we are the lucky people because we live in wealthy countries compared to others that have no choice.
But at the same time, when you say it's a journey, always is. Yeah, when you make a transformation like that. But at the same time, with the pandemic we just coming out of, it showed transformation can accelerate very, very fast. And this is where it shows you actually it's doable. Changes which a lot of people said, working from home, adjusting to the infrastructure, that you have access to the data from home everywhere easily or easier than before, that companies start to think about their digital transformation more seriously in order to really to take care of the resources better. And I think that what people said before, hey, it takes time, one step at a time, or be cautious about this, that you don't damage your business, it's doable. Because all of a sudden you see companies moving very, very fast. The transportation industry, with all the electrification, is huge push, much, much more than what we saw 2 years ago. So there are positive trends. So it's like you said, put your mindset around it and make it happen. It's a willingness. Yeah, the businesses, as long as they are flexible, can adjust. And actually, kind of the difference between if you take the European continent, and North America here as a difference. In North America, quite a bit is driven by the corporations, by the industry, because quite often a progressive thinking. I'm not saying there's no progressive thinking in Europe either. There is, yeah. But this is where there's a lot of, or let's say this way, more governance from the governance in there, and they are a little bit too rigid. Yeah. That needs to change as well in order to allow the businesses to be more innovative and change their business models faster. Yeah, so this has to go hand in hand. So there's on both sides something pro and con, and I think people realize that now more so.
And it really goes back to our discussion about systems thinking, but from a broader standpoint, investors, government,
right,
legal, maybe, obviously the technology, the science, everything has to work together. And like you said earlier, add the global aspect to it, where not everyone is as developed or has the same government structure and whatnot. I think that complicates things. So there's challenges, but there's definitely things that can be done. And I think we all agree that there's definitely potential. And it could be a win-win situation. I agree with you both. And I think I'm saying it's with a sense of urgency. So my next question is also coming, following up that article, and we'll start with you, Frank. What do you think more when you look at existing businesses and companies? You also mentioned Shell, for example, versus more new businesses, new innovative businesses. Which one is more inclined, in your view, to change, and why? And what do you think? What are some of the challenges for each one of those type of companies, and if you have any recommendation of solutions?
When you look and usually when we go out and talk about the challenges from a global economy perspective, especially the established larger businesses versus the new upcoming business startups, one of the main things what we see is they usually start with a clean sheet. So you have I have to go back. Yes, they have a technology people like, that's why they are in demand quite often. That's why they are buying those things, the people, the end user. But the main thing is really, and this from a business perspective, they don't deal with the legacy other people are dealing with, the established companies deal with. And that legacy is from a lot of different viewpoints, processes, general corporate cultures they have, then of course from a legal financial perspective, pension funds, etc. That's all a burden quite often on those companies, and they have to deal with this. The new upcoming businesses don't have that. At the same time, when we're talking about the processes are also from this clean slate again established. The only difference is, or not so much actually a difference, is that people who are joining the new companies, the young companies, quite often still think in the older terms, but they still a much more modern process, because again, from a clean sheet. So, but because they joined a new organization, those people are usually inclined to change or to adopt new thinking. And that's why you really have to make use of that open-mindedness of those companies and change that industry. The challenge for the big companies is that they are too rigid. Yeah? And that's, if they realize this, that they need to be more agile, forget about a lot of complicated, call it bureaucracy, governance structures, make it simpler, then they can start to move faster as well. The other thing when it comes to the smaller companies, scalability. They forget quite often is that at some point when they really hit the market and people demand the product, the service more and more, are they as a company, as a business, agile enough? And that's where we go back to, do they have the right processes in place? We talked about the system thinking, sustainable innovation environment in place. So from that perspective, they're on the same boat as the big companies. Change the thinking, change the culture. The advantage they are, to begin with, more nimble, have a clean sheet, and they should be able to apply those new thinking and those new processes easier than the larger companies.
Yeah, I agree. I think the incumbent companies, yes, their key challenge is both the cost, there's a premium cost, but also the effort, the investment that is to go into changing, reimagining themselves, re-engineer, they rethink their processes, like you said. That's a big challenge, especially for large companies. But at the same time, with the right investment and, like you said, the open-minded and the external resources, that's definitely doable. I think that article from the BCG group actually brings excellent examples for it as well. Jos, what's your take on that?
Well, I was thinking, I saw last week a very interesting presentation from a French consultancy firm called Aegis, who are active in the construction industry. So they both advise construction companies in creation of new buildings, and also they have a role as asset owner. So they are the ones that manage the asset data and do the asset management of construction. So they are both coaching and both, I would say, also in the construction industry as an asset owner. And one of the big complaints always in the construction industry that it's very old-fashioned. Their productivity hasn't grown in the past 40 years, despite there are new technology coming, new ways of working, but they still have a mindset that, okay, we fix it on site and we make our money from the claims, where we say, the customer didn't tell us, so now we have to fix this, and this is going to cost you. Because their margins are relative low when selling their projects, the EPC companies, but they benefit from, if there is a claim, for more work to do. And what you see that also the generation in those companies, nobody really technical savvy will be part of those companies. Technology is not there. And What Aegis is now showing in France is that they are working from a digital twin concept for a construction in the early phase of combined with BIM and the modeling of a building or a construction, but also offering it as a afterlife, as a real digital twin, simulating the behavior of the existing construction. And this has gotten a lot of traction. I mean, some famous buildings also in the Paris area are now managed by them. And this is where you also see young people coming again. They are interested to do this work. And you don't want to work in such an old company. And that's the other point. Young people who are familiar with technology and also care about the environment, they don't want to work in those old companies anymore. And the war for talent is you have to be positive and sustainable. And that's not only for the construction industry, also for other companies.
Yeah, completely true. And I know that we addressed the new businesses, the new companies. Obviously, they're, like you said, in their case, there's less of a challenge. They try to be innovative from the get-go, and they normally have good, resources and talents and younger people. I think on their side, it's a little bit more about increasing the demand for their products, but that's a different issue. But you brought up some good examples from the construction industry, which leads me to my next question, and this will probably be the final question because we're getting to the end of our time for the session, so you can add your conclusion as well. But with the last question, I want to focus more on specifically on your areas of expertise. So Frank, you're coming from system modeling, simulation, MBSC. You also more from the PLM perspective. How do you think that these tools, solution platforms, whatever you want to call them, can directly contribute either today or future planning to the topic of sustainability in general? So obviously sustainable innovation, but the broader sustainability topic. And if you have any examples, my problem today is that there's a lot of talk from the major software OEMs, but it's very high, 30,000 feet overview, goals and discussions. I'm still missing the more practical approach. How can our tools be used, for example, towards increasing sustainability, tracking the footprints, dealing with emission pollution, and so on? So I was interested to see what your take is on this, more specifically in your areas of expertise. So Frank, please.
Yeah, you see me a little bit smiling here already, because that alone can be a very long discussion. So I have to make sure, and you reel me in if I take too long here.
Sure.
You see, when you talk about system modeling and simulation or MBSE, one of the things what we have to keep in mind, we are not necessarily talking foremost technology here. We are talking the process, the foundational underlying infrastructure, the enabling capabilities. And a lot of people forget about this. When you talk to the big solution providers, they try to sell a tool, but forget about the cultural, the collaboration aspect of it from the very get-go, and try to force you into their only solution. There are a few people in there which have actually a very good vision, to be honest, but the whole as an organization to get this across, I don't see it yet. Yeah, and this is where, again, where you have younger companies, smaller companies coming in with a different approach, more from an open source perspective, etc. Even here in this case, when we are talking MBCA, system modeling and simulation, digital twin, you hear a lot of platforms. Platforms are really, when we are talking about as a backbone for collaboration, data sharing, information sharing, creating knowledge. The rest is where you have the execution. It's like you have on your iPhone, on the smartphones, where you have apps on top of that. And this is where the flexibility comes in. And this is where you need to have an open environment so you can attract all the various ideas, technologies in order to help you for the various industries, for the various businesses. Because at that point, even something, and we see this already in the early stages, that small businesses are very much competitive because they don't have to do those big investments anymore, because it's not a big ticket item that much as it was in the past when you're talking about software or those underlying technology, because you're talking cloud, you're talking agile collaboration between the various tools and apps, and that makes life much, much easier. And that's why I'm going back to the construction industry, what you mentioned. And I think that's why we see more and more of a push, because those are more smaller companies quite often, than compared to an automotive OEM. And even there, you see a lot of startups as well pushing the limits. So yes, there's a change in when you're talking about system modeling and simulation, SMS, MBSE, model-based system engineering. It's about the way you think. When you take just the normal effectiveness or efficiency improvements, you can easily do 30, 40, 50% year over year when you just focus on technology. But you have to have a magnitude of changes in order to get the new system thinking. And that's where to really change your processes, be nimble, easy, keep it easy, and the culture, be open-minded. I think that's some of the major things I would like to highlight all the time.
Very well. And Jos, what's your view on this topic?
When we discuss the tools, I would say the concepts of the tools are there. PLM is all about sharing information, and it supports fully system thinking. The name PLM, Product Lifecycle Management, somehow indicates that you can look at the whole life cycle of a product. Of course, as Frank mentioned, the vendors don't want to share too much. They want to lock you in their life cycle and their capabilities. But product lifecycle management as a methodology, as a domain, I think has everything in itself to create a sustainable and a new business, if the willing is there. And that's why you see, if you look at the concepts of the circular economy from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, it's, I would say, a blueprint for system thinking. You don't have only requirements for your products, you also have to have requirements for where do your parts come from, how are they going to be used, and how are they going to be decommissioned. You want to capture everything in one system and to reduce the leakage of resources. So it's a mindset, and PLM tools, and in particular also simulation tools are fantastic, because they allow you to quickly, without making expensive decisions, to look at trade-offs. What is the optimal way of bringing my product to the market and keeping my product in the market? And this is the traditional thinking. I think the more newer way of thinking that is also coming up is product as a service. And somehow cloud is also an example already. You don't have to own the computers, but also in other businesses we will see more and more product as a service. And that means you as a product owner, you own the full life cycle. So it starts to make sense also to think about the waste, about the reuse of the materials. And that's one of the points I made for electronic EVs. When I spoke with a company that make the electronic vehicles about their sustainability PLM processes, well, they didn't have it, because it were the old guys from the automotive that were hired to work in this company, and they know the way they did it before. And they said, and why are you asking this? Because our product is green. But from the other hand, the battery has maybe not such a long life cycle as a normal gasoline engine. So they might in the end create more waste if they don't start to think sustainable also in their processes. And that's I think the big step, what I'm currently discussing with companies also, to create the awareness that PLM is an excellent foundation for system thinking and the full life cycle. But you have to start believing in it and doing it. And thanks to the Boston Consultancy Group, we saw that it is profitable, being sustainable. And even Shell realized that they didn't lose market share or share value after the core decision.
Yeah,
because I think the society is already further ahead than people want to think or want to believe. And maybe to add one more comment to So when you say PLM, it's kind of the thinking what we have already. Product lifecycle management, to think of this as an innovation platform, and also what we go from a larger perspective when you talk about getting different organizations, cultures together is a business innovation ecosystem environment, because different systems, different platforms have to be switch or work together in tandem collaboratively. Yeah. So yes, the thinking is there. We just have to adjust our approach to that in order to make properly use of that.
Sure, and I completely agree. I think PLM, even today, has the tools to foster such transformation towards sustainability and that system thinking. I personally, as someone whose bread and butter is actually implementing PLM, I think in order to increase awareness, that's more the different vendors. I would more kind of package all the different tools that are there, like you also mentioned, just make it more as a green, increase the awareness in the system, or basically more obvious that some of the tools can be used today with a sense of urgency to foster such, change. So I think, gentlemen, we reached our time limit here. I really want to thank both of you for your insights and views. It was extremely interesting. I think that we talked about the world sustainability, business sustainability going together. I think we agree that there is potential. It's a win-win situation. The investment in sustainability is also the right business investment, or could be, even though there are some challenges. And then we talked about some aspects, it's more specific to the PLM and again, the system thinking, which is critical in this transformation or move towards more sustainable world. So again, I want to thank you. Also for the audience, I'd like to invite you to follow and subscribe to the PGGA group, the PLM Green Global Alliance website. You can subscribe and follow us. Also the LinkedIn group, if you haven't done this already. And with that, we'll conclude. So thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Ilan.
Yeah,
thank you,
Frank.
Very
much.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.